flight of the bird, so effortless and graceful, has led man since the dawn of time to turn his gaze with longing to the skies. But his dream of soaring above the clouds was not to be realized without weary centuries of experiment and failure. The first chapter of the conquest of the air is written in legend. From ancient Greece comes the story of Icarus, who attached wings to his body with wax. In defiance of his father's warning, he flew too near the sun. The wax melted, and he fell to his death. Man, because he was himself denied the power of flight, reverenced it as a supernatural quality, and could give no higher honor to his gods and goddesses than the endowment of wings, in acknowledgement of their superior being. In antiquity are found many examples of this expression of awe at the power of flight. Statues typifying this cult are found in Greece, Rome, and Assyria. As legend merges into history, records are found of men endowing themselves with this attribute of the gods. Such a man lived in the days of the Roman Emperor Nero.
Who is that fellow?
A worker of the black arts. He calls himself Simon the Magician.
How does he propose to entertain us today?
He has acquired the art of levitation, so he says.
Give him the signal to fly.
First known attempt at flight in England was made just before the Norman conquest by Oliver, a monk of Malmesbury. From Constantinople came the story of a Saracen who fell to his death in an attempt to fly with artificial wings. In the 13th century, Roger Bacon, an English monk, was the first man to realize that flight required scientific study and that magic, a pair of wings, and plenty of self-confidence were not enough. But the time was not ripe for his theories.
In your treatise on the secret of art and nature, there are strange fancies concerning machines and artificial engines with which no son of St. Francis should be concerned.
I do not deny it.
Rather, these things savor of necromancy and heresy and lead you away from God. So then, in order that you may learn humility, by prayer and in solitude, you will be deprived of your books and of your professorial chair, and shall be confined to your cell for 10 years.
In 1400, Gabriele Odanti of Perugia built wings which were not attached to his own arms, but were actuated by levers and beat the air much as Bacon had visualized. His experiment was a failure, and broken in body but not in spirit, he resumed his lectures at the University of Venice.
Gentlemen, the imagination of mankind has never ceased to entertain the hope of flying. Scientists and philosophers, heroes and poets, all have prophesied the conquest of the air, which for centuries has incited the human mind to higher efforts. But it will not be achieved without the help of genius, science, and unimaginable sacrifices.
The Renaissance. A new impetus was given to all branches of arts and science. Leonardo da Vinci, the greatest genius of the age in painting and sculpture, also turned his brilliantly versatile mind to the problems of flight. His disciple Zoroaster was eager to fly the machine which da Vinci had built.
Master, do you not think it is time for me to test your flying machine?
Not yet. Man's own force will never be able to move the wings of our machine with the speed of birds.
You will need more than mere bravery to fly with any success. Just as a dog swims in the water by striking downwards and backwards with its paws, so does a bird maintain itself in the air and travel through it by beating downwards and backwards with its wings. But you must realize, Zoroaster, that air is a much lighter element than water, and therefore offers less support to an object in it. Now observe the wings of this eagle. From their size, you can conclude what huge wings a man, with his heavier weight, would need to support him in the air. To beat them fast enough, he must bring machinery to his aid, and that is what I have tried to do in this design. But I am convinced that we are still far from perfection, and so I repeat, it would be folly for you to attempt a flight here.
But Zoroaster, in his eagerness to fly, disregarded Da Vinci's warning. Fired by Da Vinci's studies, men all over the world, whose ignorance was only equaled by their imagination, planned flying machines, many of them of rather unorthodox design. This is a Chinese model, whose pilot apparently used a small sail. This first cross-channel flight. In the 16th century, Abbot Damien of Stirling, when ordered to Paris, proposed to make the journey by air. The spectators were privileged to see the start of this ambitious flight. And the finish. A century later lived the Italian scientist Borelli.
It is impossible for men to fly by their own strength. In birds, the power of the wings is 10,000 times greater than the weight of their bodies. The wild duck in flight goes whistling through the air at the rate of 120 wing beats per minute. The partridge, when startled, rises from the ground with a whir of wings like thunder. And in insect flight, the honeybee, for instance, makes 300 wing beats per minute. The arms of man, by flapping with the wings attached, would have to exert a power 10,000 times greater than they actually possess. And so I say that it is quite impossible that men should ever fly by their own strength.
Still the birds held the mastery of the skies, mocking at man's endeavor to imitate them. Faced with the problem that man had not enough strength to fly by his own power, students of flight made experiments in other directions. In 1670, Francesco Lana, a Jesuit of Brescia in Italy, had reached the stage of planning a machine lighter than air, and even of making a model of it. His idea was to create a vacuum inside very lightweight copper globes, which would then become lighter than air and consequently raise themselves in the boat attached below them. This remarkable man not only conceived a lighter-than-air machine, but also foresaw that the flying machine could be put to evil uses as well as good. He said that if any man were to turn his contrivance to evil use, disaster would come of it in the future. No city would ever be safe from such boats, from which arms, bullets, and bombs could be thrown to devastate humanity. A century later in France, the Montgolfier brothers made a study of the movements of cloud and smoke.
See how easily the smoke rises from the chimneys, Stephen?
Yes, but the clouds rise even higher. If we could capture one little cloud in a bag.
It'd be easier to catch some smoke in a sack, I think.
And then?
It'd take us up into the air. It'd have to be an enormous bag, filled with smoke, with a basket underneath. Yes, that's the thing, smoke. Smoke in a bag. Smoke in a paper bag.
Encouraged by the success of this small balloon, the Montgolfier brothers continued their experiments and several years later built a large balloon, which, filled with hot air from a fire, made an ascent in Paris. In 1783, another hot air balloon rose into the air, carrying a sheep, a cock, and a duck as passengers. But the first man to dare to make an ascent was Jean-Francois Pilat de Rosier.
But, Monsieur Montgolfier, what exactly is your object?
We wish to prove that our balloon will carry a human being into the air.
The king has given us permission to carry out what may seem to be a dangerous experiment.
2 condemned men are to be released from prison to make the ascent. Although
Is it right that the honor should be for criminals?
To find the right man who will risk his life. That is the problem.
Gentlemen, I will be the first man to fly.
De Rosier took with him on the flight a cousin of the king, the Marquis d'Arlandes. The great interest displayed by the spectators was not so much due to the historical importance of the flight as to the roaring fire kindled immediately under the flimsy and very inflammable balloon, which gave the adventure a suicidal aspect. The crowd looked forward to the same enjoyment they would obtain from a public execution. To fly. The date was the 21st of November, 1783.
We're going down! First row! First row!
Suspended inside the balloon was another fire which could be stoked in flight in order to produce more hot air and thus prolong the journey.
Jean, how far are we going?
I don't know.
The success of this flight aroused tremendous excitement in France. The idea of a man rising through the air filled the citizens with the most fantastic ideas and expectations. They believed the balloon had opened new worlds, so that balloonists would be able to explore the moon and the planets. A few years previously, Tiberius Cavallo, an Italian scientist, had been experimenting with the idea of inflating soap bubbles with hydrogen gas. It was this that led to the hydrogen balloon. 2 years later, Charles, a French chemist, following Cavallo's idea, with the assistance of the Robert brothers, filled small linen and paper bags with hydrogen gas, with alarming results amongst the French peasantry.
What is that?
It's the devil! It's the devil!
This balloon, built by Charles and Robert in 1784, already embodied the principal features of the modern balloon. A few months later, as the hydrogen balloon superseded the hot air balloon, the sport caught on in England, following several daring flights made by that most picturesque figure in aeronautics, sportsman, soldier, and Neapolitan ambassador to England, Vincent Lunardi.
Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these spheroids are envelopes having been filled with inflammable air or gas. I now take my seat in the undercarriage or gondola. The vast machine is tugging at her anchor. At my signal, she is released and rises majestic to commence her conquest of the air.
Yes, but you're at the mercy of every wind that blows.
No, sir. With the aid of these wings, or pinions, I am able to control, correct, or counteract any adverse trend or current of the breeze.
Or wind.
with the aid of these wings, I rise into that element hitherto unvanquished by man, the air, or atmosphere.
And where does that get you, sir?
Sir, it places me completely over the heads of such groundlings as yourself. Furthermore, it inaugurates a new epoch or era, the age of flying. Well, no gentleman will dream of driving a coach and four, but will each have his own balloon. In a few years, the sky will be filled with balloons. Yes. And now, ladies, who's for a ride to the ceiling with Leonardi, eh? You will not see the clouds as I did, rushing and rolling over one another like a great wave in a tempest, but you will. There is scarcely any higher compliment that you could pay me.
Then a year later, ballooning had become as popular in England as on the continent, and sportsmen were seeking new records. The first cross-channel flight to be attempted since Abbot Damien jumped from his wall in Stirling was made from Shakespeare Cliff, Dover. The aeronauts were Jean-Pierre Blanchard, a Frenchman, and Dr. John Jeffries of Boston. They had a favoring wind, and it appeared they would have an easy success. However, as soon as they reached open water, the balloon began to fall, bringing them uncomfortably close to the sea. The two pioneers not only had to throw overboard their ballast of sandbags, but were compelled to make a start on their clothing. Just as modesty was about to be outraged, a gust of wind lifted the balloon, carrying it across the channel and over the French coastline. So ended another great historic flight. For the first time, the sea had been crossed by air. This flight foreshadowed the day when the Channel would no longer be England's invincible defense. Designers now started to evolve a dirigible balloon or airship. Typical of many early attempts is this model, with paddles optimistically worked by manpower, while this one is an elaboration of the same idea, with an observation car lowered and raised by a winch, a device used a century later by Zeppelins in the Great War. But what is this? A flying Swiss roll? A fine achievement, no doubt, but where's his rudder? This bat-like contraption did at least enable its inventor to fall from a considerable height without great damage to himself. Here is an English machine of more comfortable appearance, hopefully designed to resemble a bird, but unfortunately it never rose from the ground. In 1816, Sir George Кейли designed this helicopter, which very closely resembles its modern counterpart. Кейli, known as the father of English aviation, is one of the greatest figures in the history of flying.
Here is the very heart of the problem of flight.
What do you mean?
Look at this screw. When I pull this string, the screw will fly upward. All we have to do is to find a power that will drive it forward. Look at this curling arm. Then you'll understand even better.
Кейli had discovered that when a sloping surface was thrust through the air, the pressure of the air would force the plane upwards.
It is this resistance which will support the machine in the air. But this much is certain. Hundreds of necks will have to be broken before man can fly.
Sir George was evidently so convinced of this that when he tested his glider in 1820, he thought it the better part of valor to have his coachman deputize for him as pilot.
Well, up you get. Help him up, lad.
Yes, Sir George, it looks very, very nice, but it don't look safe to me.
Nonsense, my lad. Come, come, sit down. Nothing can happen to you.
Maybe it can't, but I would like to have 1 foot on the ground.
Oh, you'll be all right. The wind will raise you several yards, and you'll sail majestically right across the valley.
As you say, sir.
Come on, boys, push her off.
Maybe I will.
This was the landing of the first successful glide. And wasn't he sensible to choose a river and not the cobblestone so much favored by his predecessors?
You've done it! Well done! Well done what? You're the first man in history to fly like this. Aye, and as far as I'm concerned, I'll be the last. If you please, Sir George, I was engaged to drive and not to fly. That gives me notice at once.
This first pilot didn't wish to rise above his fellow men, and so, in search of a less ambitious existence, he disappeared from the pages of history. Other inventors followed Кейli's lead. Henson and Stringfellow published ambitious designs for a steam-driven aeroplane, and later Stringfellow experimented with steam-driven models along a wire. In Germany in 1860, the boy Otto Lilienthal watched the flight of the birds, as Da Vinci and countless other pioneers had done before him. The keen interest he displayed matured into the scientific study of the problems of flight. In 1889, outside his father's hay barn, he tested the lifting power of various types of wing surfaces.
He thinks he's an eagle. I say, eagle, can you lay eggs too?
Never mind, boys. You'll be ashamed someday when you see me fly over your heads like a stork.
It was now realized that it was only a matter of years before the air would be finally conquered. In a frenzy of competition, inventors all over the world set to work with renewed vigor. Here is a machine of strikingly prophetic design. This is Sir Hiram Maxim's huge machine, which weighed nearly 4 tons. Needless to say, it didn't fly. In the meanwhile, Lilienthal, realizing that gliding must be mastered before powered flight could be considered, built a glider and made flights of increasing length. Lilienthal painstakingly recorded the results of his labors and pointed the way to further researches. A few years later, his discoveries were to find their way into the library of the Wright brothers and contribute greatly to the culmination of centuries of endeavor. However, Lilienthal was not satisfied with the length of his flights, and so constructed an artificial hill from which to take off. After more than 2,000 successful glides, some of which were 1,000 feet in length, he thought that he had at last mastered the art of controlled flight by swinging his legs to stabilize the movements of the glider.
Paul, you're wrong. To design a flying machine is nothing. To construct one is something. But to control it, in flight, in the air, that's everything.
Thus died Otto Lilienthal, his frail craft dashed to the ground by an eddy of wind, his face upturned to the skies he had hoped to conquer. An advance was made in 1852 when Henri Giffard fitted a steam engine to a cigar-shaped balloon. This was the first power-driven airship to fly. 30 years later, Renard and Krebs built an airship driven by an electric motor. This was the first machine to be completely maneuverable in the air. From 1898, the famous Brazilian airman, Santos Dumont, famed for his flight around the Eiffel Tower, contributed greatly to the development of the airship by building a number of these machines and flying them with increasing success. Meanwhile, in Germany, Count von Zeppelin made a revolutionary change in design. He built an airship kept rigid by a metal framework.
I've attempted to solve the 3 fundamental factors in the development of the dirigible. That is to say, the shape best suited to cut through the air, a way of rising without ballast,
and a way of descending without losing gas.
This was achieved by forcing the nose of the machine up or down by means of a sliding weight. From this craft, all modern airships have been evolved. 4 years later, in 1900, at Kill Devil Hill, North Carolina, the brothers Wilbur and Orville Wright built a glider and conducted experiments which were directly inspired by the achievements of Lilienthal. They also thought success could only be achieved by putting every theory into practice, and attempted nothing further until their glider had absolute stability in the air. Their first great contribution to modern aviation was the controls. They devised movable wing surfaces, a rudder at the rear, and an elevator in the front. This gave them greatly increased control in the air. The Wrights made over 1,000 glides that year and reached the stage where they believed their glider was ready for an engine. These men were inspired by the genius of Da Vinci, the perseverance of Lilienthal, the inventiveness of George Кейли, and the thoughts of men of all nations. It needed only the invention of a motor combining great power with little weight to crown their efforts with success. The perfection of the petrol engine was the answer. On the 17th of December 1903, the Wright brothers' plane was placed on a rail ready for flight. Only a few Coast Guards from a neighboring station came to see the most important event in modern history. A 40-mile-an-hour wind was blowing, which made the flight more hazardous and might well have deterred less enthusiastic pioneers. The brothers, however, tossed a coin for the honor of attempting the first flight. Orville won and lost no time in installing himself in the very uncomfortable position from which he was to pilot the machine. After a last-minute inspection, in which engines, struts, and wires were overhauled, it was decided to lose no more time. The pilot gave the signal, and the men who were holding on to the wings let go. The machine launched itself along its rail, and the Wrights had triumphed. For the first time in the history of the world, a machine heavier than air and carrying a man raised itself into the air. The dream of centuries had come true, the conquest of the air. In Europe, airmen were quick to take advantage of the Wright brothers' discoveries. This early seaplane, designed by Blériot and Voisin in 1905, rose into the air towed by a motorboat. This aeroplane, designed a year later, was notable for having the first pneumatic tires and a motor worked by carbonic acid. Here is a good example of one of the many biplanes constructed at this time by the Frenchman Henri Farman. It flew with considerable success. This hydroplane, as it was then called, was the first machine to take off from the water under its own power. It covered a distance of over 4 miles without mishap. Two factors support the aeroplane in flight: pressure below the wing and suction above it. The wing, seen in section, presents an angle to the horizontal. As it is pulled forward, the leading edge cleaves the air current in two. One stream going underneath is compressed by the downward slope of the wing surface, which creates a zone of high pressure and forces the wing upwards. The other airstream is deflected above and away from the wing, thus forming a partial vacuum which sucks the wing towards it. This vacuum provides twice the lifting power of the pressure below. Just as a screw bites its way into wood, so does the propeller screw its way through the air and draw the machine along. The development of the aeroplane gave rise to flying exhibitions all over the civilized world. Vast sums of money were offered as prizes for record flights, and many hair-raising feats were performed in these primitive machines by daring pilots, such as Blériot, Farman, Santos-Dumont, Latham, A.B. Rowe, and Graham White, who were idolized by the masses. Some were able, by manufacturing planes, by teaching pupils, and by exhibition flights, to earn enormous sums of money. Here is a plane piloted by Mr. Grader in 1909, giving one of these exhibitions. At another meeting, these people are awaiting with eager anticipation the takeoff of this new plane. The fashions of the day are not designed to cope with slipstreams, but nobody seems to mind. The aviator gives the signal, and the machine rapidly gathers speed. Faster, faster, faster. He pulls the stick and up. No, something's wrong. What can be the matter? Ah, it's the newsreel cameraman. However, nobody asks for their money back this time. In 1909, a prize of £1,000 was offered by the Daily Mail to the first man to fly the English Channel. On the French coast near Calais, 2 men, each determined to win the prize, were ready with their machines. The Englishman, Hubert Latham, had already made an unsuccessful cross-channel attempt the week before, but was ready to try again as soon as the weather permitted. Nearby, Louis Bleriot, a French pilot of repute, in spite of a bad burn to his foot in a recent flight, was also impatiently waiting for the wind to drop.
At the first sign of a break in the weather, I'm off. Now listen, I want you to call me at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Louis! Huh? Louis, the wind has dropped.
Quick, my things.
Your patches, Louis.
No, I shall not want you until I get back from England.
Everything ready?
Everything ready.
All right.
Contact. Oh! By the way, Alfred, where is Dover?
Somewhere over there. Au revoir, Louis. Au revoir.
Monsieur Latham. What's the time? Never mind the time. Bleriot is on his way to England.
My photo! My photo! Splendid! Splendid!
A year later, in 1910, Georges Chavez, a young Peruvian pilot, took off in a Bleriot monoplane to cross the Alps.
Contact!
It was a very dangerous undertaking, as no one yet knew how a plane would behave in the air currents found in mountain ranges. Success was his, but as he circled round to land, the engine failed. The plane got out of control and crashed to the ground. Chavez died later in hospital, but the Alps had been conquered. In 1911, Gustav Hamel flew the first aerial mail from Hendon to Windsor. But the rapid development of civil aviation promised by these early feats was not yet to be. War intervened. Designers turned their energies to more sinister purposes. No city will ever be safe from such craft, from which arms, bullets, bombs can be thrown to devastate humanity. And so the prophecy of Lana the Jesuit was fulfilled after 300 years. This first war in the air gave us heroes on both sides. Von Richthofen, the leader of the famous flying circus of Germany. Guynemer, who shot down 50 enemy planes for France. Albert Ball, the famous air ace of England. In 1918, Gabriel D'Annunzio, the famous Italian poet and airman, took off with his squadron for a raid on Vienna. This was one of the first successful leaflet raids, and presumably did more to improve relations between Italy and Austria than a bombing raid would have done. Char-34 in 1919 made the first double Atlantic crossing. The Graf Zeppelin flew around the world and later maintained a regular transatlantic service under Dr. Eckener. The English R-100, seen in the distance, received a courtesy visit from the Graf Zeppelin. Compare the lines along which these two great ships were built. Soon afterwards, the R-101, at the outset of a pioneer flight to India, crashed at Beauvais in France. This terrible accident brought home to English designers the danger of the highly inflammable lifting gas hydrogen, and the building of airships in England was abandoned. Germany, however, still put her faith in the great carrying capacity and long range of the airship, despite its low speed. The Hindenburg made many transatlantic trips with freight and up to 50 passengers. The most luxurious accommodation was provided, consistent with extreme lightness of furniture. Everything from a table to a cocktail shaker was made of the lightest material. Then, coming into land at Lakehurst, USA, something happened. What has never been fully explained. All that is known is that hydrogen was once more responsible. Despite this terrible loss, the Germans built an even greater ship, the new Graf Zeppelin, filled with a non-inflammable gas helium. This gas was obtainable from America alone and existed only in small quantities, so it was realized that the future of the lighter-than-air machine lay not in commercial development, but in the realms of scientific research. Professor Picard, the Belgian scientist, has made several ascents yielding valuable scientific data. In an aluminium gondola attached to a vast balloon, he has ascended 10.5 miles into the stratosphere. The balloon leaves the ground only partially filled with gas, for at great heights the decreasing air pressure causes the gas to expand and the balloon to assume its spherical shape. In these regions the sun shines eternally, and at all times the stars and planets are visible. So begins the conquest of the stratosphere. The great developments made in the aeroplane during the war are turned to constructive uses to help make the world a better place to live in. Aeroplanes cooperate with rangers in detecting forest fires. A new use is found for bombs. Not to cause fires, but to put them out. On bursting, the bomb releases a dense cloud of chemical vapor. The fire is effectively stifled. These planes are not laying a smoke screen, but are spraying crops with insecticide to keep them free from disease. In the vast wheatlands of Russia and Canada, weeks of toil are saved by sowing grain from the air. The aeroplane speeds the doctor in his fight against sickness across the breadth of Australia. With the return of peace began the age of aerial transport. Bombers were converted to passenger planes. Within a few months of the end of the war, a regular service was established between London and Paris. Another converted bomber made one of the most magnificent flights in air history. In June 1919, a Vickers Vimy took off from Newfoundland, battled across the Atlantic through storms and dense fog, and reached the coast of Ireland 16 hours later. This frail craft was piloted across 2,000 miles of open water by the Englishmen Captain Alcock and Lieutenant Brown. The age of air pioneering had begun. In the same year, Captain Ross Smith and his brother Keith left England on their epic flight, over Egypt, through Arabia and Persia, on over the dense jungles of the Ganges Valley, the forgotten cities of Burma and Siam, down the Dutch East Indies and out over the dreaded Timor Sea to Australia. Thus it was that in a craft similar to the one used by Alcock and Brown, a trail was blazed halfway across the world. In 1928, Sir Alan Cobham, already a pioneer of renown, left England in a light aeroplane to make the first flight to Cape Town. His advent spread dismay among the animals. Even the rhino ran for it. Only the lion stood his ground and roared defiance at this new rival. Cobham was the first person to make the double journey by air. From Spitsbergen, Admiral Byrd flew to the North Pole, and later to the South Pole. So were opened up fresh regions where man might prove his mastery of the air. The 25-year-old American pilot, who had been flying mails across the Rocky Mountains, took off from New York and flew non-stop to Paris in 33.5 hours, a distance of 3,600 miles. This was the first solo Atlantic flight. The Australian, Sir Charles Kingsford Smith, flew the South Pacific from California to Australia.
Sir Charles, do you think that this is the forerunner of commercial flights across the Pacific?
Well, it's rather early to speak on commercial flying across that rather big piece of sea, but I certainly say the commercial flying across the Pacific will come. Maybe not in 1 year, maybe not in 2 years, but it will come.
In a light moth aeroplane, Amy Johnson flew solo to Australia, the first woman to make the journey. James Mollison flew solo from Ireland to America, and later he and Amy Mollison flew from Wales to America. In 1931, the brilliant Australian pilot Bert Hinkler made the first west-to-east crossing of the South Atlantic, flying a Puss moth. A year later, the Frenchmen Codos and Rossi created a new long-distance record of 6,600 miles non-stop. In 1933, a fleet of 23 Italian flying boats under the command of Air Marshal Balbo flew from Italy to America and back. Distances were now of such little account that air races were flown over courses that only a few years before had been so perilous. In the 1934 Milton Hall Air Race, Scott and Black reached Australia in 71 hours. Jean Batten flew from Australia to England, from Australia to New Zealand, and in 1937 from Australia to England solo in record time. Squadron leader Clouston and Mrs. Kirby Green flew to the Cape and back in 5 days, 17 hours. But pioneering takes heavy toll. Among the victims were the lovable and brilliant world flyers Amelia Earhart, who crossed all the oceans, and Wiley Post, who twice flew around the world. In November 1938, 3 Royal Air Force bombers flew over 7,000 miles non-stop from Egypt to Australia, further than ever before, a triumph for pilots and craftsmen alike. All these and 100 other flights now fulfill their purpose. Surveyors and map makers are sent out along the routes of the pioneers. Aerial photographs make maps quickly and accurately, discover hidden places, and help plot the best course for the regular air services shortly to follow. The peoples of the empire helped to build the aerodromes and later to provide the ground staff. From the sands of the desert arises a gleaming airport. In strange contrast is the guard of Arab tribesmen. And so an air service is born. After millions of miles of travel and endless experiment, Imperial Airways evolved the machine most suited to flying vast distances. Through hot climates and cold, the Empire Flying Boat. These people are embarking on a 7,000-mile journey to South Africa. The once remote places which yesterday were the goals of the record breakers are today regular ports of call. Besides 20 passengers, their luggage and provisions, the flying boat takes up to 2 tons of mail. One by one, the engines are revved up as the plane prepares to leave.
Starboarding up. Boarding up.
She rises over Southampton water and heads south to the Mediterranean. As soon as the pilot has set his course, he switches over to the automatic pilot, which takes control.
Right.
And does his work for him. The wireless operator now adjusts his aerial and remains in constant touch with stations along the route to give him his bearings and check his course. And so, via Marseille and Brindisi, Corfu and Athens, the flying boat alights at Alexandria, the air junction for Africa and the Orient. Soon she takes off again, her modern lines contrasting oddly with the native boat which has remained unchanged since the days of the pharaohs. On up the historic waters of the Nile, inland over the pyramids, southward till the thunder of the mighty Murchison Falls is rivaled by the roar of the 4,000 horsepower engine. After her scheduled stop at Kisumu, she skims the waters of Lake Victoria. She speeds on her way to Mombasa, Dar es Salaam, Mozambique, and Lorenzo Marquez to discharge her passengers at Durban within a week of starting. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, two pilots are flying a giant Douglas airliner across the American continent from New York to Los Angeles. Lighthouse beacons mark the route at regular intervals.
Los Angeles calling K4728. Jets fall over airport, approximately 1,000 feet.
K4728 calling Los Angeles. Okay, over.
The fog is so thick that the pilots cannot see to land. They will have to use their blind flying instruments.
Charlie, you'll have to use the beam.
This wireless beam is operated from the airport and controls these instruments, which tell the pilot almost as much as if he could see clearly. This instrument enables him to keep a horizontal flight.
Into there.
This means that he has moved off the beam. He alters course until the note is again continuous.
We're on the drone. Shut her up.
With aids to navigation such as these, pilots in every quarter of the globe are able to carry passengers and mails by day and night across all kinds of country and land them safely in every kind of weather. These people are embarking on the Yankee Clipper, which is now in regular service across the North Atlantic. England is building even larger and more powerful machines for regular transatlantic flights. They are developed from the Empire flying boats, which are giving such yeoman service. Imperial Airways now has airliners of the beautifully streamlined Frobisher class. Air travel is now as widespread and regular as the railway. Holland flies Douglas liners on her KLM service to the Dutch East Indies. An Italian Capri airliner flies over the monuments of ancient Rome. The brilliant Spaniard Chieva perfects the autogyro, which dispenses with wings, can hover in the air almost stationary, is crash-proof, and takes off and lands with virtually no forward run. In America, this invention has been ingeniously adapted to make an aeroplane do service also as a car. This machine differs from the autogyro in having its horizontal propellers, or rotating wings, driven by a motor instead of by the wind. It is called a helicopter, and resembles closely George Кейli's prophetic design of a century before. It even flies sideways and backwards. There is a plane driven by a steam engine. It is cheaper to fly and minimizes fire risks. However, the advantages of some experimental craft do not always immediately spring to the eye. This one seems to need a lot of wing surface to do, well, whatever it does do. And here's one that doesn't use wings at all, but flies with the aid of a sunshade instead. As for this one, well, it flies through the air with the greatest of ease, but what makes it go? Oh, a motorcycle engine. And here is the famous Flying Flea, which makes such astonishing flights. Blimey. Which has made such an astonishing flight. When the traffic gets on this gentleman's nerves, he drives his motor tricycle into his garage, pits himself out with a pair of wings, and whoops. Now, isn't that nice? In England, research workers, experimenting in greater speed, design a series of supermarine seaplanes, the ultimate and streamlined. These planes won the Schneider Trophy contest 3 times in succession. The last race in 1931 at an average speed of 340 miles an hour. Shortly afterwards, one of the planes raised the speed record to 407 miles an hour. A speed then deemed incredible, but now equaled by our latest fighters. The versatility of the aircraft designer is limitless. This machine, used as a target for gunnery practice, flies by radio, with no human pilot at the controls. Amazing heights are reached by experimental planes. The oxygen suit worn by this pilot suggests an inhabitant of another planet. This Bristol monoplane is specially designed for flying at great heights. The machine has an enormous wing spread, supported in the rarefied atmosphere at 50,000 feet or more. The short Mayo composite craft is the most spectacular step forward made by designers in their efforts to make each horsepower carry more. The lower machine helps the upper into the air. In this way, the smaller machine can carry a far greater load and bigger reserves of petrol than it could ever lift into the air by itself. The two machines separate when the required height is reached. The upper plane speeds on its way non-stop to Montreal or Cairo. The lower one returns to its base. Another triumph of design. The airman now has complete control over his plane and handles it with a knife-edge precision that enables him to perform with the greatest self-confidence aerobatics that seem to court disaster. Flies for the sheer joy of flying. The fields of his activities are boundless. War once more spreads over the world, and man again flies to kill. England is reluctantly compelled to divert the genius of her designers and the resources of her industry to modernizing and expanding her small but efficient air force. Her old fighters and bombers are superseded. The biplane gives place to the monoplane. Harrow heavy bombers make their appearance. Bristol Blenheim bombers with a top speed of 280 miles an hour, faster than any fighter of their time. The huge flying boats of the Coastal Command guard our shores. The Fleet Air Arm is expanded. Far out at sea, deck landings are practiced and perfected. The monoplane fighter makes its appearance, the Hurricane and the Spitfire. New planes with a terrific performance. And new men for new planes. England is ready for the time when action will follow mere words. Britain evacuates her cities with speed and efficiency. London assumes an unfamiliar appearance. In a matter of hours, the women and children leave for safety, and the Air Force is alert to ensure that safety.
But now we are at war, and we are going to make war, and persevere in making war until the other side have had enough of it.
Then, and not till then, can aviation resume its true development. As we contemplate the peaceful skies, we realize inevitably that the use of the heavens as a field of battle is opposed to man's truest aspirations in the air. The quest for peace and the silence of the clouds,
For these serene flights above the earth, man has the glider. It has no engine to shatter the silence, but uses instead the winds and upward currents to lift it to the clouds. At last, man shares with the bird the conquest of the air.